honor to introduce our next speaker, who I met many years ago. Actually, it wasn't that long ago, but it seems like it. When we met for the first time, I was working at the University of Washington at the time at Partnerships for Native Health, doing clinical and social behavioral research. And I can't even remember why, but she came into my office to meet with me, and I remember her walking in the door, and she was pregnant with her first child, and she sat down and we had this incredible conversation. And there's something about being around pregnant Indian women. They're so powerful. They just emanate this powerful thing that they're doing to carry our next generations and to bring that into existence. And we sat down and we talked about her research, and we talked about her filmmaking and her dedication to the community, to do community-based participatory research where it's guided by the community for the community. So I would like to welcome Dr. Valarie Jernigan. She is currently at the University of Oklahoma, where she is the Assistant Dean for Research at the School of Community Medicine. She's also a citizen of the Choctaw Nation, and she's also my friend. So welcome, Valarie.
Hello, good morning. I have my own laptop because I forgot my glasses and I can't see my prompts very well. So I'm going to talk with you today about a couple of studies that we have going on in Oklahoma. And I'm hoping I can have enough time at the end for questions because there are a number of folks in the audience who are leading these studies and involved, and I'd like to invite them on the stage with me. I want to start by thanking the organizers of the conference and the Shakopee community for hosting us at this beautiful location. This has become one of the most important conferences, if not the most important conference that I attend each year. So it's a pleasure and honor to be here. I also want to thank the partners who I will be sharing information about our work today, Choctaw Nation, Chickasaw Nation, and Osage Nation, and our funders, National Institutes of Health. So we have worked very hard, like everybody in academia does, to create a center. That's how we get resources and information out to the university, and we've started a center, and these are a number of the lovely people that we work with. And our tribal partners aren't even on this. I couldn't fit everybody on here, but we're very lucky to have a number of folks here today. The work that we do is in Oklahoma primarily right now, and this is a map of the nearly 40 Native nations that we have in Oklahoma, and the projects that I'm going to talk to you about today are the FRESH study and the THRIVE study. So FRESH is in Osage and THRIVE is in Choctaw and Chickasaw nations. So food system, that term is in my title, and I think it's good for us to understand what we're talking about. When we're talking about food systems, there are many conceptual models that present the food system. But until a few years ago, this picture was very new to me. Like most people in medicine and public health, I was trained in a way that we looked at the outcomes of the food system. So we're looking at cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And as I started to get more and more knowledge in these areas in my partnerships with tribal communities, I wanted to understand the bigger picture of what is causing these diseases. And I think Deb said the phrase, following the seeds. And I feel like that's part of really that phrase stuck with me because that's been a big part of this journey for me, is stepping back and trying to look at a bigger picture. And so the food system is what this is about. And this conceptual model I like because it's simple and it just describes the processes that are required in feeding a population. So the environmental inputs and the producer and consumer components, so growing, harvesting, processing, packaging, transporting, marketing, consuming. Those are all of the aspects of the food systems, and I'm interested in how the food systems in Native communities operate, because they operate within that unique context of sovereign nations and that cultural context. So the Thrive study is really focused on mostly the consumer aspects of the food system, and that's where we started. The fresh study, we expanded a bit to focus more on the producer aspects. So Thrive started out as an idea we had that we wanted not to replicate the good work that was already happening within the tribal health systems, but rather do something that would complement the work of the tribal health systems, and we wanted to do something within the environment. And we learned pretty quickly in our preliminary work that food insecurity was a key issue. 58% of folks in Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation we surveyed were food insecure, which is very high. If you think about the national percentage, it's about 14%. And we also saw that diabetes, obesity, and hypertension were associated with food insecurity, even when we controlled for things like age, gender, education, and income. As part of that preliminary study, we also found that more than 60% of natives that we surveyed shopped for food at least 3 times or more at the tribally owned convenience stores. And if you've ever been to Oklahoma, you are probably familiar with these stores. Just a show of hands, how many people have visited or shopped at any of these tribal stores? So there's a pretty good amount of hands up. So these tribal stores are amazing because they have helped to boost the economy of tribal nations. And so we didn't realize that many people were shopping there for food, though. And I don't think that in talking with tribal leadership, they realized that was going to happen either. These stores were initially developed to build economic base, but they're located on the sides of highways, and in some smaller communities, they really do serve as the primary, almost functioning like a grocery store. So this is a map of all the tribal convenience stores in Chickasaw and Choctaw Nation. You see dotted in the red dots, and these are some outside of the stores, one in Broken Bow and one in Ada. The Thrive study is a participatory research study that almost goes without saying. Everything we do is participatory and community directed. So that was the orientation for this study. It's a cluster control study. So there are 2 intervention and 2 control stores in each tribal nation, and it's a longitudinal cohort study. So we took a group of native shoppers and we surveyed them before and after the intervention. The intervention strategies are basically the 4 Ps, as they're called: product, placement, promotion, and pricing. And so at this point, when I start talking about the specifics, I refer to Choctaw and Chickasaw as nations A and B when we talk about data per tribal IRB request. So the interventions lasted 9 and 12 months, and what we were looking for specifically is we were looking for increases in fruit and vegetable availability at the store level, and we were looking for increased vegetable and fruit purchasing and intake at the individual level. So this was a 2-phase experience. And the first phase, we realized that we had absolutely no idea what we were doing as health professionals. So it was really important for us to really throw ourselves at the mercy of the commerce and the government leaders to give us a sort of understanding of what these stores sell and how they're sold. Sorry, my slides are really jumpy. I'm not clicking it. They're just jumpy slides. They have a lot of pictures. So we needed to establish a baseline of what was available and basically what could become available, because we didn't want to come to the communities and ask them to sample new products without being sure that we could offer the products that they prioritized. And so we established objective measures of the food stores, and then we looked at what was available through the distributors and the different vendors. And this process took about 1.5 years, and it involved really intensive meetings with all of the leadership to really develop relationships and gain trust and be able to access the stores in a way that would be respectful and not hinder business or take anything out of the stores. We were focused on putting additional items into the store. And the next phase was really developing the intervention strategies, so the other P's, so placement, promotion, and pricing. So once we understood the products that we could get, and we were aiming for a minimum of 10 snack choices that met our criteria for healthier, which was the nutrition environment measures criteria, and we were looking for 5 meal choices that met those criteria to provide enough availability and variety. We focused on the strategies. So the strategies, determining those involved focus groups, and we did taste tests, and we had sort of audience poll research tools. So you try this and you rate it in real time, and then we would ask you, how much would you buy this for? And we would use the suggested retail price, and then we would compare it with the top sellers, which at that time were potato logs, which are basically a huge French fry, and $2 hot dogs, and so on and so forth. So we used all the highest sellers, and we compared them with the intervention foods that we were thinking about offering. And we also learned how to do shelf planograms and really became quite convenience store enthusiasts. My dream is still to go to the National Convenience Store Conference, which I hope to make soon. It's really interesting. So a summary of our products. So these are some of the new products that were created as part of this process. These are salads and wraps, and they were actually packaged in-house as part of this intervention. The placement strategies, if you look at your left, that's before, and if you look at after, that is after we reconfigured the stores. The white is packaged food, blue is the refrigeration units, and red are the intervention foods. So when you walk into the store, that first space is like the Malibu of the convenience store. It's like the beachfront property of the convenience store. It's very high real estate. So we, in a number of the stores, removed the hot boxes and put them behind the cash registers, and we replaced those spaces with large open-air walk-around coolers. The end caps are also very high priority, and those are the end of each of the aisles, and so we use those as places to stock healthy foods and around the cash register as well. So these are examples of the promotion. We had a number of the signage that we used translated into the native language, and we placed them throughout the store strategically. Pricing was an interesting piece of it. We agreed with both Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation that we had grant funding that would augment the price of foods were they not to sell. And in agreement with Chickasaw and Choctaw, they said, okay, for the first month that we do this intervention, we're gonna establish a baseline of how foods sell. We're gonna need to list them at the suggested retail price, which they did. The surprise fact, and jumping ahead getting to results, is they never had to reduce the suggested retail price. So they never had to use grant funds to augment any lack of sales, because they did, in fact, sell, and they sold for the suggested retail price. So for those who are interested in the details of our statistical analysis, our methods, we have our paper is coming out in American Journal of Public Health, but we basically looked at the following components in determining the efficacy of this intervention. We looked at loss to follow-up compared to those completing follow-up surveys. We looked at the intervention stores, specifically the promotion effects. So could they recall the promotion signs? Did they purchase the product that was promoted? And was there any effect from the sign on their purchase? We also looked at, in terms of intervention versus control stores, their perceptions, the shopper's perceptions of the nutrition environment. So as a native shopper, did you have improvement in how you saw the stores in terms of the healthy food options offered? And we looked at consumption. We looked at effect of dose of exposure to the intervention. So our dose in this case was the frequency of shopping. So we were hypothesizing that the more you shopped at the store, the more exposure you would get to these interventions, and the more likely you would be to purchase healthier foods. And we did chi-square tests, t-tests, trend analysis for the dose effect, and confidence intervals for changes over time. So when you look at our findings, so Nation A, when you're looking at intervention and control groups of those completing both baseline and follow-up surveys, there were some differences between them in Nation A. The intervention group participants were more likely to be female, they're less likely to be employed, and they had slightly more people in their households who were under 18. There were not any significant differences between intervention and control groups in Nation B. So this is the perceptions of healthy food options at control and intervention stores in Nation A. And here you see significant differences in perceived food environments. And this is based again on the nutrition environment measures survey, has a P at the end, which is perceived. So that's a Likert scale. So it's a mean greater than or equal to 3 on the NIMS P scale indicates agreement with the statement. So in this table, you can see that shoppers at the intervention stores reported significant increases in the placement and the promotion of healthy items and nutrition information, as well as the availability of healthy grill options, while these remained essentially the same for the control store participants. And the between group effect was also significant for changes in placement and promotion of healthy items in the store. This tells us that changes in placement and promotion differed significantly from intervention and control. And just so you know, the control stores in this nation did not have a grill, so that's why we were unable to compare the grill aspect. So same story with Nation B to an extent, but here in Nation B, you see that shoppers reported placement and promotion of unhealthy items decreased, while placement and promotion of healthy items increased in the stores and at the grills for both the intervention and control stores in this nation. So what do you think happened? Well, I can give you a clue. There wasn't any contamination. I didn't show you those slides for time. What happened was a surprise to us, because if you're doing interventions in Native communities, you tend to think that okay, if one community way over here in a whole different county is a control community and another community is way over here, 2.5 hours away is an intervention community, it's not going to provide sort of ethical issues around, being, for instance, in a classroom and having the student right next to you receive an intervention, but you don't get it because you're a control. That was not the case within this nation. Citizens and community members in the control communities were coming to Commerce and telling Commerce, why are they getting these new options in the stores in these other towns? And we want these options in the stores in our towns. And so Commerce in that particular nation ended up starting to offer the interventions in the control stores at about the 6-month period because of community demand. So, of course, the epidemiologists and biostatisticians are horrified by this, and they're like, oh my God, it's gonna screw up our data. But we were thrilled because isn't this what we want? You know, we're wanting to create demand. So these are my last two sort of outcome slides, but basically this is an example of the store food availability pre and post the intervention. So you see at the bottom, intervention and control. And my slide got a little off when it got formatted, but significant objective differences before and after the interventions in terms of creating healthier food environments in these stores. So we did it. We did it. The other outcome slide that I'm presenting here, and again, we have both nations had they basically had very similar, almost virtually the same results, but this is an example of our trend analysis of intervention exposure based on frequency of shopping. So at the bottom, you see less than 1 time a week, 1 to 2 times per week, or 3 or more times per week. And you see noticed reach-in coolers, notice the signs, bought fruit or vegetable from the coolers. So they're noticing it, and it's influencing their purchase. So to summarize Thrive, it increased healthy food options, perceived and objective. We saw that it influenced decisions to purchase healthier items among a high proportion of shoppers. Like other studies, though, that only target the environment, and remember, we didn't do anything but change the convenience stores, we did not see a significant change in overall dietary intake, but we did change purchasing decisions, especially among those shopping more often. And this was such a huge win for us because we really wanted to be able to go to tribal leadership with this message that not only if you provide it, that they will buy it. But we are now finishing analyzing our cost data, and we saw no change in sales. So one of our next papers is going to tell the story that you don't lose money. We did believe that this indication was increased demand for the foods when the spreading of the interventions were happening by request, by pressure. And I think one of the biggest wins from this study was the result in policy changes. So in ordering up these healthier options across the tribal convenience stores, in most of the stores, they could not supply us with 5 meals or 10 snacks that met the criteria that we wanted. And so rather than lose valuable Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation business, the distributors expanded their suppliers so that they were able to supply the foods that we ordered. And those expanded options are a permanent policy change that is available to all the programs across both Chickasaw and Choctaw Nations. So the Elders programs, the Head Starts, all of them have these expanded options. So that was a big win for us. Our next steps, we want to expand the intervention strategies. We need to include a behavioral change component. We want to focus on traditional foods, and we're wanting to focus on an increase in local options. So the next study that I'll share very briefly with you is the FRESH study with Osage Nation. And remember that if Thrive was touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of that food systems model, FRESH goes a little bit deeper. FRESH is an initiative that was really started by Osage Nation leadership. So specifically, Assistant Chief Raymond Redcorn and Jeffrey Standing Bear, Chief Jeffrey Standing Bear. So the land in this study is on Osage Nation. It's Osage Nation land, but it was repurposed to build a farm. And the idea is to foster sustainable food systems. And so Osage reached out to us to see if there would be an opportunity to evaluate the health effects of this initiative and if we could plan a health program that would go parallel with their efforts, and that's what we did. So this is a 16-week gardening, healthy cooking, and community capacity building intervention to increase vegetable and fruit intake and reduce BMI and hypertension among Osage families. And it started in August of 2017 and goes through January of 2018, the actual intervention. So this is you can tell I love conceptual models. That's my downfall. At the far left, you see the intervention components of FRESH. So we have a farm to school menu change, school gardens and activities, and hands-on curriculum in gardening, healthy cooking, and food sovereignty. And these are our hypothesized proximal or short-term effects in the middle, and our distal or long-term effects at the far right. So we think that at the proximal level, we'll see increased exposure and access to fresh produce, which we already see a lot of. Increase in knowledge of traditional growing and gathering practices. And at the more distal, long-term outcomes, increased intake of fresh produce, sustainable access to fresh foods and produce, and food security, food sovereignty. So these are just some pictures from our online curriculum. It's part of it. We have a monthly food sovereignty workshops where we really map the food system and determine priorities for developing sustainability for the food system. These are some of the school garden sites and activities. And so from building the garden beds to now seeing them actively being used, it's quite inspiring. And this is my last slide. We've learned a lot in this effort. It's a group of primarily women, though there are a number of men. Most of us are members of the nations that you've heard about today, and we're in this for the long haul. We really want to do something to change the food environments of our communities. So we're focused on sustainable community food systems and food security, and we want culturally centered interventions that can restore the health of the environment, support traditional indigenous knowledge, the things that Deb talked about. All of that is what we're learning about and restoring, and elevate what's working in communities. If you know much about all of these beautiful initiatives happening in Hawaii, I had the privilege to go there this summer to the Sustainable Ag Conference, and Kamo Inus, one of my public health heroes, made the statement I included here: we can't heal the people if we don't heal the food system. So I'll conclude with that and take questions. And I would really like to invite Margaret Sisk from Osage Nation to come up. Margaret leads the FRESH study. If Joy Standridge is here from Chickasaw, it'd be great. Cassie Camp and Alex Bledsoe, because they're really the people on the ground. I want to just honor all the work that they do.